Christian Horner and Max Verstappen, have recently made comments that they are concerned for the new engine regulations and concepts that are coming in 2026. Lawrence, in a digestible manner, can you please just state for us what these changes in regulations are all about that we can expect in 2026?
Technical regulations are never that digestible. That's part of the
No.
issue, isn't it? But I can give you the basic outline. So the engine bit, the V6 turbo, is largely staying the same, although they are removing the MGUH. But I won't go into the details of what the MGUH does because it's irrelevant going forward. And what you're going to have is that V6 turbo engine and a hybrid system, essentially, like in a Toyota Prius or something, and a hybrid system. But the hybrid system, rather impressively, is going to produce 50% of the power that the Formula One car produces. And they're looking at similar figures to now, so north of 1,000 brake horsepower. So at the moment, the hybrid system is just above 20%, around that area. So to go up to 50% is significant. And obviously it requires a huge amount of engineering. The other major factor is that we're moving from fossil fuels, so fuel based on oil, to renewable fuels. And so that is in itself a fairly big challenge as well. Now, it's really the 50% electrical, 50% internal combustion engine ratio that Red Bull seem to have an issue with. They think that basically that every car is going to run out of electrical power to deploy around the lap. We do see that occasionally, even under the current regulations, where you'll hear about drivers talk about clipping, which is basically where the car is regenerating energy at the end of straights, and sometimes they lose a bit of electrical power and it feels like the car's slowing down all of a sudden. So we've heard about that before when they push hard in races. Well, Red Bull is suggesting that that's going to be on a completely different level in the new set of regulations, to the point that they'll actually be using the engine almost as a generator to feed the battery. So they'll be downshifting at the end of the straights to create higher revs to feed electrical energy back into the battery, which doesn't seem like the most sensible way of going about it. But and on top of that, we don't yet have the chassis regulations confirmed that are going to pair with these new engine regulations. Now, the aims of the chassis regulations, I mean, chassis is probably the wrong word, but the aero regulations as well, is to reduce drag, which will make these cars more efficient. Therefore, you might solve some of those issues you have with the 50% electrical, 50% internal combustion ratio, and also make them lighter. But that's hard when you're basically going to need more battery capacity, significantly more battery capacity than you had before, and the batteries are very heavy. So you've got all these kind of factors playing against each other. And the other problem, and this is something that Max Verstappen has relayed, is that if you reduce drag, you're probably going to reduce how exciting the races are, because the drag on a car, obviously, it's something which all the teams are trying to remove as much as possible. But that creates the possibility for slipstreaming. So you get behind another car, you reduce the drag on your car, and then you can overtake on straights into braking areas and so on. And so they're looking at ways of making these cars super efficient with drag, which might involve something similar to what we have currently, which is a drag reduction system, but have it working all around the lap and also on the front wing as well as the rear wing. So basically active aerodynamics, which change as it goes around the lap to get the most efficient lap time. And there's a concern that all this emphasis on efficiency and everything is actually going to have a negative impact on the racing. But it depends who you talk to. That's what Red Bull's saying. And Red Bull are saying that because they believe they are so advanced with their understanding of the new power units that they've come across these problems before anybody else, and they've run it in simulations, and they're worried that it's going to make for some dull racing. If you talk to Mercedes, they say there's no problems. And also they say that when these regulations were first devised, there was always going to be this element of fuel burning to result in more electrical power, and there was no issue with that among the engine companies, because we have this sustainable fuel. So even though it sounds a bit wasteful, the fact that this fuel is not based on any type of fossil fuel, it's entirely really made in a lab, therefore it's not an issue. So you've got all these conflicting views, and as ever with a regulation change, it's hard to know who to trust, because each team obviously wants to succeed under the new regulations, and each team will have some idea roughly of where they are and where they want to be. And perhaps if Red Bull are starting to say, well, we should move to 55% power from the internal combustion engine, 45% from the electrical system, is that because they're worried about the efficiency of their electrical system and how they're going to generate power from it? Meanwhile, if Mercedes is saying, no, don't touch the rules, does that mean they're ahead? That would be a logical assumption to come to. It's very hard to know without knowing what their dyno results are and getting a look inside the engine factories and seeing whatever they're doing. But the other theory, which is the Red Bull theory, is that Red Bull are ahead and therefore know more about the pitfalls of these new regulations. Either way, it's going to be a bit of a political bum fight over the next probably few weeks or months, really, because decisions have to be made, because this is for 2026. And really, if you're going to start to make changes about, where the power's coming from in these engines, you need a decision fairly soon. So there you go.
Based on the conflicting responses, well done, by the way. I'll give you a 7 out of 10. Do you think that's fair for digestible?
I think
information.
Yeah, 7, 8. Okay,
7, 8.
I'll
bump you up to an 8.
It's above average. Yeah. That's...
above average. Because of these conflicting responses, right, from Mercedes and Red Bull, Nate, read between the lines for me here. Is this a tactic by Red Bull to stay on top, or do we actually have legitimate concerns over how these new regulations will impact F1 moving forward?
I think you seem to get this. It's like a cycle, isn't it? Like every time there's a new regulation change, you have people coming in saying this is the worst. This is it's going to kill Formula One. It's going to be this. It's going to be that.
Sky's falling. Yeah,
and Horner, and it's almost become, it's like the next chapter of the Horner Wolf kind of mudslinging contest as well. I'm sure there's valid. These are much smarter people than me.
See that, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, same. I mean, I think Vegas, that's how they should kick off. It's just be those two mud wrestling. And then the race starts right after that. That'd be fantastic. I don't know why I went mud wrestling. That was a weird, maybe a weird glimpse into my brain. I don't know.
Oranges to oranges. All the same.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, I don't know. Lawrence is much better at digesting the technical side to me. I find all of this, after a while, it just gets really tedious because it's so far down the line. I think most fans, if they're brutally honest about it, don't really either care or understand enough to really get it. And I think it's just a lot of it's just grandstanding between different manufacturers about this. I think ultimately when we get to 26, I think things will be okay. One team will be ahead, the other teams will be behind, and then they'll all be in the same situation. You'll have the team that's second or third suggesting, well, maybe we should change the rules, and then the team out in front saying, no, the rules are the rules, we all signed up to them, and everything will continue as normal. It's kind of the cycle we get into. So I know it's important stuff, especially with the fuels that they're moving onto and stuff like that. But I think what Drive to Survive has shown is that really the compelling thing for a lot of people is the people kind of in these arguments rather than maybe some of the more technical things. So hopefully Formula One can find a way to resolve some of these debates. But I think ultimately, whenever you hear Horner or Wolf talk, you've got to take both with a pinch of salt because they're massively self-interested. And that's not a knock on those two. I think to succeed in Formula One, you have to be. So you just got to let it play out. And someone's always unhappy going into a rule change. Someone's always like, this rule change doesn't suit us, or, we've been screwed over in some way. It's happened every single time I can remember there being a rule change. And I think it's just part of the circus. It's part of what's compelling about it. But the further into it you get, the more you just start to think, well, it's so far away as well. I mean, we're still 2.5 years out from it. So for a lot of people, I think it's difficult to really buy either team are really that knowledgeable about what's going to happen, even though they are, they're working on these projects already. But for them to, I mean, Max was already talking about what, a lap of Monza is going to look like. It's 2.5 years out. This is technology they'll be working on a lot. So I think things will look a lot different, even a year from now when they're talking about this. So, yeah, I mean, let's just go straight to the mud wrestle and get all the engine stuff out of the way. That's what I would do. But again, that's why I'm not running F1 at the moment.
I think you'd get a decent amount of votes.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.